Loud. 3, 2, 1. Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison and I will be your host for the evening. I'm the Director of Programs with NAMI North Carolina. That's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, the state office. I'm glad you're here with us tonight. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of connecting to one another and finding community, finding conversations on the topic of mental health. Our goal, of course, is to be constructive and helpful and to learn as we go. July is Minority Mental Health Month. This week's topic is the alarmingly high rate of suicide among Black youth. In general, for youth in the United States, America is the second leading cause of death. That's between the ages of 10 and 19. For Black young folks in particular, it is growing faster than any other racial or ethnic group. It's a huge concern. Specifically, suicide attempts by Black adolescents have risen by 73% since 1991. Tonight's guest is Fonda Bryant of Charlotte. She is a national spokeswoman on this issue, and she has a story to tell. We're going to get to that in just a moment. For our virtual audience members of color, I hope tonight's show unfolds as an expression of support from NAMI North Carolina to you. For those of us who live with privilege and have not experienced racism or racial trauma, this is part of our ongoing conversation. It's important to us to work against stigma and be open to the process of having our eyes opened and seeing the world differently. What can we do to be part of the solution? That is part of our mission at Thursdays with NAMI, is to look at that question, unpack it, and have this kind of authentic conversation. So, as usual, the early part of our show will be a conversation with our guest, Fonda Bryant tonight. About halfway through, we're going to show you a video of the week, and after that, we'll be answering as many questions as we can before 8:30. Now, a word from our sponsors. I'm going to share my screen so that you can observe this very beautiful logo from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Abuse Services. These funds are secured through the Community Mental Health Services Block Grants. We are grateful for the division's ongoing support. Moving right along, Thursdays with NAMI is recorded. If you have friends who could not join us tonight, please let them know it is never too late. We believe in second chances at NAMI. This program will be available on our YouTube channel within just a few days. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to read this bio. Fonda Bryant is a Gastonian native and proud mother of a former Wake Forest University football player. She began as a mental health advocate 21 years ago and has been involved with NAMI for 6 years. She's organized many high-profile events on suicide prevention, some including professional football players, some including the Carolina Hurricanes on their Hockey Talks night. And she organized a program in which high-level garages started posting suicide prevention information because folks were jumping off the building in despair at different times. That's one way people complete suicide in North Carolina and across the nation. As a certified QPR Suicide Prevention Instructor, she has taught 600 people from 22 states. She did that in just 2 months earlier this year. Welcome, Fonda.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm so glad
to be here.
And you're a member of our board, so you're contributing in many ways to NAMI North Carolina. Tell me how you're taking care of yourself these days.
Well, you know, the gym was my sanctuary, so it is closed now. So you have to find other alternatives, and one of the alternatives that I found is going for a walk on a nature trail. In the university area here in Charlotte, we have a great nature trail, and I try to get out there at least 3 to 4 times a week. And then I'm back to, I took a break from training in QPR Suicide Prevention training in June, so I'm back to that. So one of the things I make sure, because I'm always giving, and putting it out there, is to make sure I still take care of me first, because these are hard times. I am a person that deals with depression and anxiety, so I have to make sure that I stay on top of stuff. I talk to people. I had that great support system. I had that toolbox that has the support, the medication, to go to therapy. But the biggest thing is just to make sure to check my fuel. It's kind of like you go and you're driving and you see that, you see your car and you see the fuel, if it's half full or half empty. I make sure not to let my energy or to let what I'm doing take me down, but ever so far before I have to say, okay, I got to stop for a minute and regroup. So for me, it's been really rough not having a gym, but again, walking has helped a great deal. So I'm glad at least I can do that.
That's one of the activities that I love too. And they say there are real concrete benefits to just being outdoors in nature. It lowers your blood pressure, it does all kinds of good things.
So yeah, it helps a lot, just to get out. And even though I see the same path, you see different people. And the one thing too is when you're walking on a nature trail, even if we're strangers, everybody's pretty friendly. They're smiling or they'll wave at you. And then it gets to the point where everybody knows pretty much everybody and what time we're out there. So, we'll smile and wave our hand, but just walking, listening to some music, looking at the trees, looking at the sun, it's really very therapeutic. So I really enjoy doing that.
Right. You have gotten a lot done in suicide prevention, as I mentioned earlier, especially for just one person. What makes that so important to you and personal to you?
Well, it makes it very personal to me because 25 years ago, I almost died by suicide. I had no idea that I was dealing with depression because in our culture, in the African American culture, we have been taught, pray about it, don't claim it, give it to God. It's a sign of weakness. White people do that. We don't have mental health issues. We're strong. We came from slavery. And I heard stuff like that growing up. So when you're brought up by a culture like that, you kind of squash if something is going on with you because you definitely don't want to be labeled crazy. Nobody wants to be labeled that or anything negative around mental health. So with the way I was raised, that it was, that we didn't have those problems or we're not weak, we're strong. Black people don't have those problems. It was very difficult to even know that I was dealing with depression. So when I was 35 years old, it manifested itself. And when it did, I didn't know, and that's one of the things I do with the QPR training. I let people know what it can look like, the physical signs, the behavioral signs, and the verbal signs. And for me, I worked as a pharmacist tech for, I was in my 5th year at Caroline's Medical Center. And all of a sudden, I wasn't eating. I take great pride in my appearance. My appearance had changed. I had withdrawn. And the pharmacists were coming up and asking me, hey, what's going on with you? And I couldn't tell them because I didn't know, And so one of my assistant director, Nancy, I never will forget, she came up to me and she said, Fonda, something's going on with you. We got to get you some help. And I was like, help? What are you talking about? She said, we want you to go across the street to the Employee Assistance Program. And that was my first interaction really with mental health services, our EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. And again, I was resistant. And that's another problem. If you're not humble, if you're not ready to get help, it's kind of like a waste of time in the beginning because you're like, oh, there's nothing wrong with me. But I went because I was like, man, if I don't go, I could lose my job. So that's really the only reason I went. So when I went across to meet with him, he said, what are you doing every day? And I said, well, I'm working full time. I'm going to school part time. And I have a 12-year-old son. And he said, well, you burn the candle at both ends. We need you to go get some help. And he said, you got to go to a psychiatric hospital. And my eyes got about this big because, again, when you think about a psychiatric hospital, think about how movies and television have psychiatric hospitals working. We are in a straitjacket. We don't know what day it is. We're deranged. We look crazy, pray tell. And that's what I thought that it was going to be. So my heart was just like beating and I didn't want to go. But again, if I didn't go, I could lose my job. So I went, and it was in the suburbs of Charlotte in Pineville. And when I first went, I met with a psychiatrist. And something I will say, it is very important to get someone, whether it's a psychiatrist or therapist, that can relate to your culture and also that you can have not saying friends, but someone you feel comfortable with. Because my first psychiatrist was from Indian descent, and we did not get along well at all. Because again, he felt like, their culture is very heavy on men, and women walk behind them and things. So it was things like that. But I went, and when I went and that door closed just for outpatient, my anxiety went through the roof. And I felt like it was a waste of time. So I went back and forth for a couple of weeks, and the depression was getting worse. It was saying, because you already feel hopeless and you already feel worthless. But it was making me feel even worse. And one day I picked up Wesley from school, and he slid down in the seat of the car. And I was like, what is going on with Wesley? And our car was old, but I thought we were doing pretty good. We had a nice apartment. He had food. He had clothes. So I was like, hey, I'm doing pretty good. But I noticed that he was ashamed of the car we were driving. Now, normally that would not have bothered me. But because of the depression, because depression and anxiety are beat up mental health disorders. You can have $1 million in the bank. You can be a star athlete. You can be a star student. You can have beautiful children, a beautiful home. But when you're dealing with depression, it does not care, and it makes you feel like crap. And so when Wesley went down in the seat of my car, that made me feel bad. Normally it wouldn't have bothered me because I'm not materialistic. But when you're dealing with depression, it magnifies everything negatively. And that's what happened. I'm like, man, my son does deserve a better car. He deserves a better mother. I'm not a good mother. And those thoughts were hitting me like a hammer. So they kept getting worse. And isolation is another thing that's really bad when you're dealing with depression or anxiety, to be alone. So while he was at school, I was at home with those thoughts. And those thoughts went from thoughts, they started turning into action. And I started saying, you know what? You're right. I'm a loser. My son deserves better. Nobody's going to care if I'm gone. And I reached out to my Aunt Kelly. Before I did that, I had a plan. I was going to take some pills and go to sleep, because all I wanted to do was go to sleep. I felt like if I did, my pain would be over. So before I did that, though, I reached out to a hero. Remember last year when NAMI's motto was, all heroes don't wear capes? Remember when we had our NAMI walk and it said, all heroes don't wear capes? That's what my Aunt Spanky is. Her real name is Kelly, but her nickname is Spanky. My nickname is Tweety. And we grew up 3 years apart. And she's always been more like a sister than my aunt. And I reached out to her and I told her, you can have my shoes. And she could have said, well, she's having a bad day. I'll call her back later. She called me back. And when she called me back, she asked me straight out, are you going to kill yourself? And I told her yes. Mm-hmm. And again, she could have said, Tweety's just, she's having a bad day. She just wants some attention. I'll leave her alone. But she didn't do that. So I didn't get to implement my plan that day. And I was feeling a little bit better because I said, I'm still going to get this done. But before I could do that, there was a knock at the door. And I went to the door, and it was a African-American, tall CMPD officer. And he said, hey, I came to take you to Cedar Springs, where I had been going for outpatient. I'm like, I'm not going with you. And I went up the steps. He went up the steps to my bedroom. And like I could outrun him or get away. And I went up to the up steps. And he said, you're going with me? And I said, no, I'm not. And my son came up somewhere behind me. And when we got up there, it was like, I'm not going. Yes, you are. And finally, I guess he said, I had enough of this. He put his hand on my shoulder. And when he did, it changed the whole dynamics of what was going on. Now, I don't smoke, drink, never done drugs. But this is something that when I'm training people in QPR, this is one of the first things I tell them. Do not put your hands on us when we're in crisis. Because when we're in crisis, we're not thinking clearly. We might be hallucinating. And when you put your hands on us, we could hurt you, you could hurt us, or both of us could get hurt. And sure enough, when he put his hands on me, I scratched him. And when I scratched him, he grabbed me by the back of my neck, threw me in handcuffs, and took me down the steps. And I was crying. And the thing that saved me from getting hurt, because this was long before CIT, Crisis Intervention Team, my son said, Mom, you need help. Please calm down. And I calmed down. But still, I was upset. So he takes me down the steps in front of all my neighbors. My aunt was out there. I was yelling at her. He puts me in the car, takes me out to Cedar Springs. And when he gets me out there, Cedar Springs sat right across the street from Carolina Place Mall, and Taco Bell was in the front. So here I am in handcuffs, never been in handcuffs. Took me out of the car, and I'm just looking at life going by. And I wanted to run, but the reason why I didn't, I said, okay, we already kind of had an altercation in the apartment. If I run, he's going to tackle me, and I could get hurt really bad. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to fight him. He gets me in there. And when he gets me in there, I'm just yelling. I said, I'm not going to take a shower. I'm going to sit here stinking for a whole week. I was just so mad. And it was traumatic. I said, hey, I'm not going to take a shower. I'm not brushing my teeth. I'm just going to be dirty. And when I calm down, the first thing they do is they check your vitals to make sure you're okay. Then they see if you got on tennis shoes or any kind of shoes with strings. They take those. You got on a belt. They take those. They take anything that you could hurt yourself with. And you still like panting and your chest is beating like a caged animal. And so then when they did that, I said, I was still upset. So when I finally calmed down, they brought me something to eat. And I was like, I don't want it. And even when they bring you food, it's very cautious because they bring you food with plastic utensils. Because, again, they don't want you to hurt yourself. So I was out there for a week, and one of the things, my Aunt Kelly came out there to bring me some clothes. I didn't want to talk to her. I was worried about my son. He was safe. He was with my brother. But I was still worried about what he was thinking. You know, that his mom didn't want to be his mom anymore. She wanted to die. So that was worrying me. And then I called my mother. And I love my mother dearly, but I learned through therapy that she's one of my triggers. So when she called me, she said, you just need to be stronger. The rally cry of African Americans, you need to be stronger. So again, it was a very rough journey because I had never been there. And it wasn't anything like I thought. We were on a very structured schedule where we got up, we ate, we had some downtime, we had therapy. And I never will forget the first day of therapy. My therapist asked me, she said, Fonda, who do you put first? And I was like, my son. I said, he's 12. She said, wrong answer. She said, when that bag drops on a plane, what are you supposed to do? Put it on your face first so you can help someone else. And then when you think about it really, Peg, in the African-American culture, we've always been taught God, family, and we fall down that ladder. So to be able to turn that around, to put Fonda up top, so I can help myself and help others, it was a journey. It was a journey. So I took all of that to heart. But again, I still wasn't accepting for help. And when I left there, I turned around and I told them, I said, I will not be back.
Right, right. A lot of what you're saying resonates with me. A lot of what you're saying resonates with me. The comment about the way you see things with depression, I live with it as well. And I used to have this expression, I see things through crap-colored glasses when I'm depressed. I don't use the word crap, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah, and that's so amazing, the comment that you made to your aunt. You can have my shoes. That was all you said.
That's all I said to her, and thank God. You know, my Aunt Kelly, when she took the QPR training, and she made a comment to everybody, and she said this to me before. She said, it's a big difference between listening and hearing. She listened to what I said that day, and because she did, she saved my life. So when I left there, again, I had no idea how. I remember when the doctor told me that it was a disease that I was going to have to live with for the rest of my life, and I'm like, I almost killed myself. How am I going to live with this? And I didn't know about NAMI, Mental Health America, that you could work out. I did not know about any of that stuff. So it was like somebody putting a blindfold on and me trying to go through a maze. It took me years to figure out how to navigate through life with mental health and dealing with depression and anxiety as an African American woman. My mother, if I would have been dealing with cancer, diabetes, heart problems, my mom would have been up here so fast. My mom did not come and see me while I was in the psychiatric hospital, and she didn't even come see me when I got out. And we haven't even talked. It's been 25 years, and to this day, she and I haven't even really even talked about my suicide attempt. It's still like, well, you know, Tweety would have just been a little bit stronger, this wouldn't have happened. So it's still that chokehold that the African-American culture has, that mental health is a sign of weakness. And we have got to change that because it's killing us. It's killing us.
Indeed. Indeed. And we know that among folks who need help, 25% of white folks will get it. I'm sorry, 38% of white folks will get it. Only 25% of Black folks will get that help. What other barriers are out there? We've talked about stigma, family.
Besides the stigma and the family issues, you also have the church. Yeah, the church as well. That's another thing. But you also have the resources, the financial resources, because somebody asked me the other day, is it less mental health facilities than 25 years ago when I went into it? Of course there are, because Cedar Springs is no longer there. It's not there anymore. A strategic behavior center that we had here in Charlotte helping youth with mental health and behavior issues, it's gone. We don't have enough beds and we don't have enough help. And then when you think about how much it costs to even go see a therapist, now if you work at a job where it's an EAP, an employee assistance program or something similar to that, they will give you maybe 3 or 4 visits free. But then after that, you might have to pay out of pocket. And not everybody has that. Going once a week might not be enough. You might need to go to therapy, 2 or 3 times a month. And then think about your medication. The medication that I take right now is not very expensive. But if you're taking some of the newer medications, or you might have to take another medication to help your mental health medication to really work, it can be very expensive. So it's also cost, and it's also resources, and it's also teaching people how to fish. That's something I've been saying. We have got to help people to be able to learn how to help someone on the front end. So we won't have these crises that, where police have to help us. We need to be able to educate people on the front end. Like with me, I was 35 years old, and my mom told me, oh, by the way, while I was in the hospital, depression runs in our family. And I just couldn't believe it, because I'm like, it almost killed me. So again, we have to do a better job. Like, I know who in my family has diabetes. I know in my family who has heart problems or hypertension. We got to do that same thing with mental health. We have got to talk about it. Aunt Sarah has, depression, or Uncle Bob has PTSD. We got to start having those conversations, because not having them and not getting is killing us. It's killing us.
That is amazing how that feeling of shame and stigma can prevent people from sharing any information at all. This is kind of a related story, but I like the story, so I'll share it real quick. I was in high school and I heard my parents chatting about smoking. My mom was trying to quit smoking and she had relapsed, and my father was really upset with her. And they didn't know I could hear them. I was sitting upstairs and my mom said, well, my mother was an alcoholic. I'm an addictive personality. And I had no idea that my grandmother was an alcoholic. She was probably one of the first women in AA in the 30s in Buffalo, New York. But why would I have to find out that way? And it's common on this topic, and in many cultures, some more than others. The stories of how we find things out are ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. It's like I said, when my mom told me that, you could have knocked me over with a feather, because again, I almost died. But see, you also got to think about that generation. They feel like that they came through so much and they came through unscathed. And I know my mom dealt with depression. And again, with our culture, when I first came to NAMI, probably several years ago, I wrote a blog for NAMI National called You Can't Pray Away a Mental Health Condition. NAMI told me that's still one of their most popular blogs to date. And it's because I wrote it from slavery, from the time we were taken from Africa to bring over here, that we have dealt with mental health conditions. You imagine being on, all of a sudden you're out there doing what you're doing, and here come these people, these strangers, and jacking you up and putting you on a ship. You don't know where your brother is, your wife, your child. So that's post-traumatic stress. Then you're on those ships, you're dealing with anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress. You get sick, they throw you off the ship. Then they bring us here, and they, white people make us conform to how they think we should be. Our relatives are sold into slavery, or your brother and sister are gone, your mother's gone. And so we were dealing with that. And then you, as time goes on, and we are realizing, matter of fact, I'll tell you a story real quick. There is an entertainer, I watched half of it, Cadillac Records, and they were talking about Little Walter, who was one of the best harmonica players ever. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He also won a Grammy. He died at age 37 years old. They said he was dealing with bipolar, and they said he died from blunt force trauma because of all the fights he was in. He self-medicated. So to me, first off, mental health help was not made for African Americans. people of color or even poor white people. It was only made for the rich. So how did we cope with mental health issues? What did we do? Self-medicating. We started self-medicating. My father was a famous blues singer. His name was Johnny Taylor. He had the first ever platinum record certified by the RIAA. He is sitting there waiting to go in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and he's been nominated for a Grammy, a Lifetime Achievement Award. My father died in 2000, and he had a massive heart attack. He died from a heart attack, but it was brought on by years of addiction. They said that he was doing drugs at age 15, not smoking weed, heavy duty drugs. So I know my father went through something, and because he would have been 85 May 5th of this year. So you think about his age, and you know back then it was still a lot of racism, and he dealt with a lot. So I know my father was dealing with some kind of trauma or something, because again, he started using drugs at an early age, and that's what happened with my culture. We didn't get help, we couldn't afford it, so we started self-medicating, and that's still going on now.
And that's what that generation did, is just muddle through, stiff upper lip, all of that.
Yes.
And I know a lot has changed from our parents' generation to the times when when your struggle started and your suicide attempt started. How do you think, what's different for young folks today? What's better and what's worse?
I think what's better is, at least now we're talking about it. We're talking about it a little bit more, and social media helps. But just like social media helps with mental health, and, you can go to NAMI, you can go to MHA, you can go to all these sites and find out stuff. Celebrities are coming out, they're putting out videos, they're doing things like that. But think about the other big. Social media is also, like a friend of mine said, the devil, because it can be very mean. People can say extremely mean stuff. So with young people now, I think they're more open to it because they're losing their friends, they're losing their classmates to suicide. And they are realizing now that they're going to have to be the ones to stand up and say, okay, we're going to help to change how people look at mental health and suicide. But then on the flip side, you have social media. I saw a story on social media on Yahoo the other day that I meant to send to y'all guys at NAMI, North Carolina, where they said that on TikTok now, people are saying, I had pasta for dinner, but they didn't have pasta for dinner. That is the new language for suicide. That is the new language. They're saying, I had pasta for dinner. So again, social media has been great with helping putting a dent into suicide and mental health. But on the flip side, it's also becoming detrimental with the bullying and, the social media and everything else, body shaming, all that stuff is also not helping too. So it's kind of like, which do you weigh? Which do you weigh?
Yeah, and there's a note in our chat box that I want to acknowledge. Thank you for training officers and people about mental health. NAMI, of course, is very involved with training police officers, corrections officers, law enforcement for the crisis intervention training. And we teach them to de-escalate any situation in which mental illness is a factor. And this writer in the chat box mentioned that he totally identified with your comment of that fear when someone puts their hands on you in that situation. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you, member of our studio audience, for writing that and letting us know your perspective. So
yeah. Go ahead.
You mentioned.
I was just gonna say real quick is that, a lot of people, when we're in crisis, especially if it's a family member or a loved one, the first thing that you want to do is hug somebody and let them know it's going to be okay. But again, when we're in crisis, you can't really do that. So I appreciate him saying that too.
Absolutely. The rules definitely change when we're feeling symptomatic and things go sideways. So you alluded to a notion earlier that Black folks don't complete suicide. It's a stereotype, a myth, something. What's that about? Where did it start? Are people beginning to realize it's wrong today?
Well, I think it came back from what I told you earlier, what my mother had said, that we didn't have mental health issues because we came from slavery. And automatically, when you think about suicide, the first thing most people think, and that's why I love that QPR Suicide Prevention training, it's not about being weak. It's not about being weak. And a lot of people look at, if you take your own life, or if you're contemplating taking your own life, that you're weak, you're selfish, and you're crazy. So for African Americans, the biggest thing is weak. And then when you got the church involved, because you know African Americans are very religious, very spiritual. When you throw in that with the pastors, a lot of times they preach that if you set up and take your own life, you're going to hell and things like that. So when you've been raised like that, either you're weak or you're going to hell. That's where that comes from. So of course they'll sit up and say, no, we don't do that. That's, or I said it before, that's a white person thing. We don't do stuff like that. So it's a myth, big time, because every 4.5 hours, someone in the African American culture dies by suicide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And another comment in the chat box, that wondering how you found out that having pasta for dinner has another meaning. That's a fascinating story, and really interesting news from the young folks.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm always go online with being an advocate and stuff. You always want to go online and keep up with things, so you'll know how to help people, what's going on with people, so you'll be able to help them. And I actually saw that article on Yahoo. And I put it up on my Facebook page, because I was floored to know that that's what people are saying. Because now, because we have had suicides on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, if you allude to that on a post, they're going to send somebody out to help you. They're going to do a wellness check. So now what people are doing, they're coming up with other ways. And I also learned this while I was training. One of the coaches that I trained told me that one of his players had posted some stuff on their Facebook page. So I always tell people, make sure, besides talking to us on the phone, texting us, or face to face, check that Facebook page, because people can be putting up cryptic messages on there. Also, one of the nursing students that I trained from North Carolina Central, told me there are actually avatars that people put up on Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is, that they might be contemplating suicide. So that's why I like to go on social media, and that's why I said it's a big help too, because you can find out things that are going on that you might not know. And I actually found that on Yahoo. So if you just Google, I had pasta for dinner, it should come up where you can get that story and read it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I've known people who, when they were feeling terrible on social media, they would change their profile picture to a solid color, like sort of voiding out their own identity online, and that's how people would know to reach out to them. So we definitely have ways to communicate, symbols, and whether I had pasta for dinner, those are so important to be in tune with those. So thank you for that, that bit of wisdom. Yeah, so if I know someone who maybe they're giving their things away, or they've gone from being outgoing to very withdrawn, I'm concerned, what should I do?
Well, the first thing is that you should reach out to them, and don't be afraid to reach out. And then you just really let them know that you care about them, that you're worried about them, and ask them how you can help them. One of the things you do not do is you don't be judgmental. That's the foundation to me of the QPR training, not being judgmental, to listen and to talk and not be judgmental. So one of the first things I would suggest, like if it's one of your coworkers and you're worried about them, you go up and say, hey, I'm worried about you. You're not looking the same. Where's that bubbly personality? What's going on with you? And don't talk to them in front of people, or, things like that. Say, hey, let's go grab some lunch. Let's go grab some coffee. And then when you had that one-on-one with them, again, just listen. Because for us, sometimes it's very hard to open up and let y'all know what's going on with us, because we're still processing it. We don't know what's going on ourselves. Like I told you, when Nancy came up to me and said, Fonda, we got to get you some help, I didn't even know what was going on with me. So it might take us a minute to process what's going on with us. Another thing too, we gotta figure out if we can trust you. We gotta figure out if we can trust you. I don't care if you're my mother, my sister, my husband. I gotta figure out if I can trust you, and you're really gonna listen to what I'm having to say. And again, you don't judge me, because again, you have a good job, your children are doing well, you got a nice house. that has nothing to do with anything. That has nothing to do with anything. So again, when you go to someone or you're worried about somebody, the first thing you do is reach out and say, hey, I'm checking on you. Are you okay? What's going on with you? And if we can't open up at that moment and truly have that conversation with you, again, just let us know. I'm here for you. Call me anytime. And in the meantime, if you're worried, start finding those resources. Start finding those resources. So when you reach back out to them, and then follow up with them again. Don't just say, hey, I'm worried about you. When you feel like it, reach out. No, you be persistent and you keep following up. And when you follow up, ask them, say, hey, do you have insurance? Do you have an EAP? And then you have resources available. And even tell them too, if you're struggling and that person feels comfortable with you and you feel comfortable with that person, say, hey, I'll go with you. It would have made all the difference with me when I first went out to Cedar Springs, if I would have had somebody to go with me, if I would have had that positive support. So again, let them know, hey, if you want, I will go with you. It's a really good thing to be able to do that, and it's a wonderful thing to be able to have somebody who can go with you through that journey.
Right. One of our key principles with NAMI support groups is that sincere, uncritical acceptance. That's what came to mind for me when you were saying we're listening, we're not judging. If we can take that label off, it's so liberating for the person to finally have a safe space where they can talk about something they're carrying with them all the time, but probably feel like they can't bring it up because people get scared, people act nervous, or they just treat you differently, maybe forever.
Correct. And that's why, again, that training is so important, and to not be judgmental and to be able to listen. Because I'm going to tell you, if you are judgmental and start telling us what we need to do and how can you be suicidal and you got a beautiful house and a good husband and kids like that, guess what we're going to do? We're going to shut down. And we're not going to say anything else to you. You can call us 50 times and we're not going to answer that phone. Because the thing is, when we're, like I told you earlier, depression and anxiety are the beat up mental health disorders. It's a negative feeling. It makes you feel negative. So therefore, if you're going to be judgmental, we already feel hopeless. We already feel worthless. So we don't need you piling on the negativity. So again, if you're going to be negative with us, I don't want anything to do with you. And something else I always tell people too, make sure you ask that person, if you're talking to them and things, make sure you ask them, is there anybody else that you might could get that would help, that would make them feel good? And make sure the key word is ask. Don't assume and go get somebody's mother, father, husband, sister, because everybody has a different view on mental health. And you do not want to bring somebody into a situation that's going to be negative. Oh, it's nothing wrong with them. They always act like that. They just want attention. So please ask, because I had a situation back in March. I was out walking on the walking trail, and I got an email from a director of counseling at one of the universities that I go and address the football players every year. And the young man, African-American football player, senior, asked me for another wristband, my famous green wristbands that I designed. He said he had popped his and he wanted another one. And I said, sure. So next thing, he sends me another email. He said, Miss Fonda, can I talk to you about my mental health? And I said, of course. I said, when I get home, I'll call you. He said, no, I want to email. I want to text you. And that's another problem with youth that we'll talk about for another day, is not being able to have a conversation. Everything is about texting. And so he said, okay, I'm going to text you. He had texted me and told me the day before he reached out to his counselor and myself, he was sitting on the porch with a machete getting ready to kill himself. And so my training came into play. I listened to him. First thing I asked him was, are you suicidal? Do you have a plan? He said, no. The next thing I asked him was, okay, promise me you will not hurt yourself until we can get you some help. And he said, I promise. So between the counselor and myself, she was able to get him help, and I was able to follow up. He is doing fine now. He knows his lifelines and his resources. He graduated from school, and now he's looking for a job. So that's part of that training. That's part of that having empathy and compassion, not being judgmental. It saved his life, and that is a great feeling. So again, if you apply these steps of being kind and having empathy and compassion and not judgmental, it goes a long way with helping people who are dealing with mental health issues.
Sure. Yep. Is there a book or a song or a movie that gives you hope, that lifts you up, that you would recommend?
Yes. My son, we were talking before we recorded, and I was telling you, you know, having to move in with my son was rough because I've been working since I was 14 and pretty self-sufficient. And then I got behind on my car payment, and you know, I hated waking up in the mornings. I didn't want to die, but I just hated waking up in the mornings because once again, the depression. You know, you're a loser. Here you are sleeping on your son's sofa, yada yada. My son sent me a song that I didn't listen to until one day we were heading up the road to go to see Wake Forest play. And he said, Mom, I sent this to you over a month ago and you didn't listen to it. It's a song by the young lady Mabel, Mabel. And the song is called the Anxiety Song. And it says, it's okay not to be okay. And if you listen to that song, she handpicked people to be in the song, to be in the video. Like it's a young lady in there, I think, lost both of her legs. It's people that have issues with body shaming. But the whole thing is, the whole song is about, it's okay not to be okay. And it's the words, it's uplifting. I listen to it at least a couple of times a week. And when I'm helping people who are dealing with mental health issues or suicidal, I always send them that song because there's no way you can't listen to that song and it's not uplifting. So Mabel, it's okay not to be okay. It's the Anxiety Song. It's a great song. And it's very uplifting.
Check out.
Yeah, you got to check it out. When you like it, you're going to say, hey, yeah, Fonda's right. Fonda's right.
What else gives you hope? Last question before our video.
What gives me hope is that the young people, because they get it. They get it. They understand that having a mental health condition is not a death sentence. They understand that if they can get help, if they're suicidal, if they get help, they can be better and they can get out here and do anything they want to do. Because one of the things I always say about hope, if we don't have hope, we give up. And that's what almost happened to me. And I always get kind of misty-eyed about that. 25 years ago, I didn't have hope and I was ready to give up. And when my Aunt Kelly saved my life, she gave me a second chance. And so now I give other people hope. It can be something as small as letting a person know you care, to where you have to do more, where you actually have to help a person that can't help themselves. But hope to me is every day waking up and seeing that I'm here and being able to project that to other people, that if Fonda Bryant can do what I did and get through it, is it easy every day? No, it's not. We got to put in the work. But if you put in the work, I guarantee you'll get better. And to me, that's the best feeling in the world, that we can get better. And with hope, we can get better. So that's my, that's how I feel about hope. And that's my hope, is that the generations coming behind us will not look at having a mental health condition as something to be ashamed of. They'll look at it no different than a physical condition, that they can get through it, they can get better, and they can live a good life.
Mm-hmm. Again, my mind goes to our NAMI support groups. Our 12th principle on the list of principles of support is we will never, ever give up hope. If you're interested in checking out a family support group or a support group for folks with mental health challenges, you can find a list of online support groups at naminc.org. It's a listing of support groups that originate from many different parts of the state. One of the beauties of an online meeting is that you can attend from wherever you are. naminc.org. We'd love to see you at one of our support groups. So now it is time for our video of the week. I'm excited to show you this little bit of coverage that Fonda and her son Wes had recently. And I also want to thank, while I'm sharing screens here, this is always the challenging part of the show for me. Give me just one moment, maybe talk amongst yourselves while I pull up the appropriate screen and make sure that I'm showing you the right thing. Okay. Stay with me, virtual studio audience, and Fonda. I've got this.
No problem.
Okay. All right. I'm going to click these buttons so that you can hear the video. And now we're going to pull this up. All right.
I'm the oldest of 5 children. I was born and raised in Gastonia, North Carolina. You know, just pretty much typical young person. My mother was very young when she had me. She had me at 17 years old. And my father was actually a famous blues singer. But he was not a part of my life. So I grew up to a single parent mom who had some addiction issues and other things. So it was hard at times. We struggled financially. We lived in the projects in Gastonia, North Carolina, but it was a different kind of projects because everybody cared about everybody. And if you got in trouble at the top of the hill, when you got down to the bottom, your mom was standing there with a switch. You were going to get it. So it was that kind of neighborhood. I looked out after my brothers and sisters, and my Aunt Kelly, who was 3 years younger than me, older than me, I always thought of as my sister. So I did graduate from high school, but it was rough because I had to work from the time I started working at 14 to help my mom out financially and to get the things that I needed growing up. So that was rough in itself. And by the time I got closer to high school, I had to really bust my butt to graduate, not because I was dumb or anything like that, but because I was working a full-time job at Kentucky Fried Chicken and working and helping my mom. So graduated from high school. And even before I graduated from high school, I got pregnant when I was 16 and had a baby that didn't live very long. That caused a lot of trauma, but my mom just kind of said, okay, you had the baby, she passed away, going to school. And that's how you kind of did it. I never was able to really express how that felt and everything. So, and my brother and I lived together for a while, but that wasn't a great dynamic. I was, went back to school. I started going to community college and working part-time and got pregnant with Wesley in 1983 and had him. And it was just a series of ups and downs, jobs. Sometimes had to live with my brother. But for the most part, I tried to keep a roof over our heads.
I had a typical childhood. I would see my mom struggle at times and stuff like that. But for the most part, I had most of the stuff that I wanted, and I was a typical kid, just worried about, having fun, playing video games, going outside and playing, watching football or sports and stuff like that. And, trying to get video games or toys or whatever it was I was trying to get. So I didn't have too many worries like that as a kid. So, really, when all the stuff happened, that was I would say my first taste of real adversity. Like, we had struggles and different things, like, as far as financially. So as a kid, it's hard for you to kind of process that a little bit. But as I said, I just had a typical childhood and did a lot of the stuff that a lot of kids did and was worried about a lot of stuff that a lot of kids were worried about at my age.
All right, and we are going to stop there for the video. There's more to it if you'd like to see it. And this is still going on, so I'm going to turn that off. All righty, I want to take a moment to thank our behind-the-scenes helpers. Executive Director Gary Kreitz is on our chat box tonight, and our super stellar intern, Eddie Simmons, is our producer. He's working behind the scenes to make sure our tech flows smoothly, which when it's in his hands and not mine, it does. So now it is time for our Q&A box. If you're wondering how to ask a question, if you're new to Zoom, there's a Q&A icon in the bottom center of your screen. Click on that, type in your question, and it will magically be delivered to us. All right. So the data in Black youth suicide states that we have an issue. What do organizations need to do to lead the effort to provide direction and leadership and make improvements?
Are you asking me or you answer that?
That's to you.
Okay, repeat that again, please, ma'am.
So the data about Black youth suicide definitely shows we have an issue. What do organizations do to provide leadership and make a difference on that?
Well, one of the things is I will say with NAMI National, we now have in place an African American male, and I'm not sure, I think that was probably the first African American as our executive director. But one thing I know, I had the opportunity to meet with him several times and have long conversations. And as a matter of fact, Gary, myself, David, who's the president of the NAMI board, and Diane, who is the president of South Mountain, we were able to really have a conversation about doing better by people of color. So as far as NAMI, they are committed to do better with mental health and suicide prevention. And I think one of their slogans this year is we need to start earlier with early detection of mental health issues, because that's one of the biggest things. Because by the time a child is 14, 50% of them are showing signs of a mental health condition. By the time they're 24, it's 75%. And the thing is, what I'm seeing with helping African Americans a lot, when people are coming to me, once their child turns 18, and they are not, so as long as they're not trying to hurt themselves or someone else, it's very difficult to get someone who's now considered an adult to get them to get help, because I see it all the time. So I will say with NAMI, they're definitely moving towards doing better with early intervention. You have Mental Health America, who is doing the same thing. And then again, with the training that I'm doing, the QPR Suicide Prevention Training, it's a wonderful training. In an hour and a half, you can learn how to recognize someone in crisis or suicidal, to talk and listen to them in a non-judgmental way, and to be able to get them the help that they need. And I've been training for training, and not just with me, but Mental Health America and a lot of other people offer this training. So again, you have organizations now who are finally, the blindfold has been taken off, and they're saying, we got to do better. We got to do better. And not just with organizations. You have Congress, people in Congress who are seeing that African American youth are in trouble. I got the Black Political Caucus report that was led by Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman that came out at the end of last year. And on that report, it says, sound the alarm, because we're in trouble. But also not just the organizations, but it has to start at home. Like I was saying earlier about teaching people how to fish. We got to get rid of the stigma, because the stigma almost killed me. And again, it's killing other youth, because as youth can't go, like I do a lot of speaking in the Charlotte Mecklenburg schools. And I have had numerous students come up to me and say, hey, I can't talk to my parents. They're not listening to me. Or I never will forget, I was at West Mac High School, which is a Title I school. It's predominantly African-American. And one of the students came up to me that was African-American. She was dealing with depression, had a suicide attempt, if I'm not mistaken. And she told me, she said, Miss Fonda, she said, my mother got me help, but she doesn't want me on medication. And this is what she said to her daughter. Well, we have nuts in our family, so you're a nut too. So again, we have got to start at home dismantling that you're nuts, you're psycho, you're crazy, you're weak. Pray about it, give it to God. It's got to start at home, so we can start making youth feel comfortable in getting the help that they need. Because this is the suicide stats, what came off that report. And I was crying when I read it. It said for young African American males ages 13 to 19, from 2001 to 2017, the suicide stats are up 60%. 60. But for African American females ages 13 to 19, from 2001 to 2017, suicide is up 182%. That's almost 3 times what the young men are going through. We got to do better. We got to start talking about it. We got to normalize it. And I had a reporter that asked me, Should they report suicide? I told them, yes, they should. You don't have to put what happened, how they did it. But until we start making suicide a health crisis, which was, suicide was a health crisis long before the coronavirus. It was a health crisis. And if we don't start recognizing it as a crisis, because when you say crisis, that means you need to move now, not later, now. We need to recognize it's a crisis. But also, suicide is the most preventable death of all deaths if people would just care enough to get educated. So again, it's great that these organizations are doing more and recognizing it. But again, we need to start at home. We need to start talking to our children about it and not being afraid and not sitting up and making them feel bad that they're dealing with mental health issues.
It is amazing that a child can go through grade school, middle school, high school, learn about cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, sex education, and still not learn about suicide and mental health. It's sort of this topic that's at an island far away. So I definitely agree with your answer there. This is a good question. How do you navigate the suicide talk in the Black community, especially when having a discussion with someone who adamantly believes religion is the answer to their mental illness, a person who won't even call their mental illness what it is for fear of being called crazy?
Well, you have to trick our people sometime, and people of color. And this is what I always do, because I do run into that. So this is what I always do. The first thing I always will ask them is that, number one, I'll say, is the brain an organ? And they'll say yes. And I said, so let me ask you this. If you had diabetes or hypertension or cancer, would you go get help? Yes, I'd go get help. I said, okay, if you had to take medication for any physical thing, heart, lung, kidneys, would you take the medication? Yes. And then I said, you told me earlier that the brain is an organ, correct? Yes. I said, so if our heart, our lungs, and our kidneys can get sick, so can our brain. And I said, our brain is an organ. It's the most powerful organ in our body. And if it goes down, everything goes down. I always, when I'm talking to little kids, I always tell them the brain is like the computer of our body. My son, one day I was talking to my grandson, and my son was saying, hey, the computers at the ACC went down. And I said, Bryce, that's how our brain is. If our brain goes down, everything goes down, and it's nothing we can do. So again, that's why I tell people, I said, hey, because when I'm dealing with Black people, oh, no, you're crazy. I'm not taking medication. Just pray. So that's how I break it down. And even with pastors that I'm dealing with, I said, okay, if I said, you can pray for us. You can read the Bible while we're on the way to get help. Because I said, if somebody had cancer or diabetes, you're not going to just say, oh, I'm going to pray for you and leave it at that. You're going to say, I'm going to pray for you. You need to go get help. That's the same way it has to be with mental health. So that's how I always do with African Americans a lot of times. I break it down into other parts of the body, but I still bring back mind and body are one. If this gets sick, all of it gets sick. So that's how I kind of do it. And a lot of times, believe it or not, something that simple breaks down that wall of stigma. And then when I share my story, a lot of times they're like, man, I can't believe you went through that. And I said, yes, and it's because of our culture that I almost died. So you just have to sometimes just let people know and just put it into the forms of the brain as an organ, because when you think about our brain, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. We could live 1,000,000 years and we're never going to understand the brain. We're never. And I also break it down into, for instance, I have a friend of mine that had a stroke several years ago. He's still having a hard time walking. He told me last week, he said, I just walked around my wall without my walker. And I think in December, it will be 3 years he had that stroke. So it just lets you know how powerful our brains are. And if something goes wrong with it, it's just not up here. It affects everything.
So note from the chat box in response to all that you just said, thank you. That is a brilliant approach. So thank you for that. Next
Thank you.
question. How do we get people to understand how important mental health is and not ignore the signs of a problem?
It's the same thing. You have to break it down into, just like I said before, that the brain is an organ and it can get sick, but it can get better. And that's how you kind of just have to break it down. And then for me, I always try to use an example. In my home county, Gaston County, a couple of years ago, we had a gentleman by the name of Roger Self who drove his car through a restaurant and killed 2 of his family members and wounded 2 others. Well, come to find out, Roger Self had told his family early, well, he had a suicide attempt before that. Then he had told his family, put the guns away. And again, they ignored that. So again, if you ignore mental health, as I tell people, death is the ultimate. It's the ultimate. That's the ultimate suicide. But it's other things. It can wreak havoc. As I told Peg earlier, it's like having a gremlin inside your head where it's destructive. It can cause poor decisions, bad judgment, self-medicating. And self-medicating is not just drugs and alcohol. It can be sex. It can be gambling. It can be eating. It can be anything that are going to get those endorphins going. So again, it can wreak havoc in our lives. So I let people know, if you don't take care of your mental health, it won't take care of you. And Gary was kind enough to go down to Clemson University with me this year to where I gave a speech on just that. And my speech was on, you can't be successful if you're not mentally healthy, or the key to success is being mentally healthy. And I broke it down and I used 3 examples. Because it was a Men of Color National Summit that focused on African American males and Hispanic males. And so this is what I did. I went in there and I pulled 3 examples. The first example was a gentleman who was in the Washington Post. His name was Alfred Postel. He was living on the streets in Washington. He got arrested. And when they took him to court, they asked him, who's going to represent you? He said, I'm going to represent myself. And they're like, yeah, right. Well, come to find out, he had 3 degrees. He had 1 in economics, 1 in accounting, and he had graduated from Harvard Law School. At one time, he was a top-notch attorney at Harvard, and a top-notch attorney, top-notch student in Harvard Law School. He went to school with John Roberts, one of the Supreme Court justices, and the judge that was sitting on the bench recognized him when he said what it was. But he had schizophrenia. He didn't take care of his mental health. It didn't take care of him. I use the example of Freddie Prince, which some people may remember him. If you're too young, you probably don't. He was on the show Chico and the Man. He was a Hispanic comedian. He died at age 22. He took his own life at 22. He was dealing with depression. He self-medicated. He didn't take care of his mental health. It didn't take care of him. And then the last example I gave was Dante West, who played in the NBA and made I think it was either 16 or 19 million dollars in his career. And the last time I saw him was a video of him getting beat down in the middle of a street, a man jumping on his head in the middle of a street in Maryland. Again, he has bipolar. He didn't take care of his mental health. It didn't take care of him. So that's what I'm saying. If you don't take care of your mental health, it's not going to take care of you, and it's going to wreak havoc in your life. So you have got to treat your mind just like you treat your body. You have got to take care of it, because if you don't, it is not going to take care of you, and it could lead to all kind of problems, and it could also, the ultimate, lead to your death.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That brings so many things to mind for me. I think the older we get, the more we think about that kind of thing, that maybe you wouldn't end up homeless, maybe you wouldn't end up getting beat up by strangers, but if we don't take care of our mental health, do we want to be sleeping all day? Do we want to not have relationships with people who care about us? There are a lot of levels to those consequences, but they are there and they're strong.
Definitely.
All
Definitely.
Right. Next question. How do you get African Americans to talk about something that they were taught only to talk to their pastor about?
You got to erase the walls of stigma. That's one of the biggest things. You got to erase that wall of stigma. And for me, it's always sharing my story. Because again, when you look at us, we look perfectly fine. You know, I'm athletic, I work out, but they don't know, like when I'm doing this training, I always let people know, I said, I come in the gym, I'm a social butterfly, and everybody's like, hey, Fonda, how are you doing? And I say, I'm fine, but they don't know 15 minutes earlier, I was sitting out there in the car crying, trying to make myself get out of the car to come in the gym, where my arms feel like they weigh 150 pounds apiece, and it feels like an elephant is sitting on me. So you have to kind of almost have people to visualize it, so they will know it's real, and it's not us feeling sorry for ourselves. It's not us wanting attention. Mental health is real. It's truly real. We can sit up here. I mean, one of the things I always bring up too, when my son played football in college, and I always like to tell people what happened to my son. We struggled through. When I got finished, when I got out of the psychiatric hospital, there was no, all I knew was to go to therapy, take medication, go to therapy, take medication. And that's still not enough. So we muddled through, and Wesley, I was worried about him. I could tell sometimes if I got upset or cried, it would scare him. So again, I had no idea what him seeing his mom being handcuffed, taken to a hospital did. So we muddled through it, and he went on to become first off, he was always a good student, because I didn't play that. He was a good student. And then he started becoming really good in football. And next thing I knew, Wesley was getting scholarship offers. The first school that offered him was Duke. He had Stanford. He had Vanderbilt. He had a lot of I see that. He had a lot of great schools. But see, Wesley was also an athlete. He was a jock. So that big ego, and Coach Spurrier coming to his school wearing a big national championship ring, that's all those kids see. They see that ring, they want one. So he ended up graduating from Vance High School. He went to the University of Florida. He didn't like it. He made a mistake. And I said, hey, you decided where you want to go, you get yourself out. So all the schools that I mentioned were willing to take him. He said, I'm going to go to Wake Forest. I said, okay. They only took 2 credits. He had to hit the ground running. He graduated on time. And then he went to another school called Full Sail in Orlando, Florida. Great school. He came back, put in the work. He now is a producer for the ACC Digital Network, on-air talent, and he works for Fox Sports. And my son is 6'4". At the time he was playing at Wake, he weighed 310 pounds. He was an offensive lineman, left tackle. He lost all that weight, and he came to me about 4 years ago, and he said, Mom, the whole time I was in college, I was playing, and he said, I was dealing with anxiety. I never knew. But this is what kind of pulled it all together. Coach Grove, Jim Grove, who was Wesley's coach at Wake, had done an article, and he called my son lazy. And I was ready to break him in half. But it came to light when my son told me he was dealing with anxiety, because, again, he's a big athlete. He looked perfectly healthy. He looked perfectly fine. But yet, people don't realize, again, a mental health condition is not just up here. It affects everything. And when you're looking at these big athletes and stuff and saying, oh, what's wrong with them? Or their coaches are saying, quit being lazy. You need to be mentally tough. They have no idea how hard it is to make it through a day when you're dealing with depression, when you're dealing with anxiety. And that's why it's so important that we take care of our mental health, because we might look perfectly healthy. And that's what makes it so dangerous too, Peg, is the fact that we can look perfectly healthy. We can be smiling, and in the back of our minds, I'm getting ready to take my own life, or I'm struggling. And people just think we're fine.
So circling back to the football and your son's choice, there's a comment from the Peanut Gallery. Oh, I mean, my boss. He should have played at Duke.
Yeah. Well, actually, you know what? I did want Wesley to go to Duke but their football team was really bad then. They were horrible. I don't think they had won any games. And also because I had open heart surgery when I was a little girl there. So I will always have a soft spot for the Duke Blue Devils, because Duke University saved my life. I was dealing with, we all are born with a hole in our heart. And my hole did not close. And I had to go back and forth to Duke for a long time. And then when I was 6 years old, they decided to go ahead and operate on me. So if it wasn't for them, they saved my life. So I'm very proud of that. So yes, I do have a soft spot, Gary.
Okay, well, we're grateful for that too then.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Another question here. How do we start to have the conversation at home about mental illness with our families?
Again, you treat it just like you would if you were talking about physical. Mind and body are one. And I think the more people realize that without this brain, we couldn't do half the things that we do. So I think you just have to normalize it by talking about the brain. Like I said, with little kids, like my grandson, we talk about, hey, the brain is like a computer. So you have to normalize it and not make it scary. You just talk to people. And number two, and one of the biggest things is you get educated on it before you go and talk to people. Have stats, have facts, and just have a normal conversation about the brain, no different than you would about your heart. Because without this, nothing is going to go right. So again, even with me, I just always tell people, have that everyday normal conversation, because the more we talk about mental health, the more we talk about our brain, the more we will normalize mental health. And that's my goal. Before I pass away, I definitely want to leave the world better than what I came in it. And I really hope that by the time I get really old, number one, I still got my senses about me, but I hope that by the time I start getting really older, that mental health will become no different than physical health, that we won't be treated differently, that we won't be called crazy, we won't be called nuts. And that's where we got to start too, with the language. Because you see songs like, oh, she's sweet but a psycho. You, BB Rexa, who says that she's dealing with bipolar. But yet you're going to make a song called I'm a Mess, which the song was great. But then when you see the video and she's in a psychiatric hospital doing the same thing that I talked about, you're in a straitjacket, you're deranged, that's not helping. So again, we got to have those conversations, but at the same time, we got to break down the stigma. So if people are sitting up saying, oh, you're crazy, or calling somebody crazy, you got to realize those words hurt, and it keeps people from getting the help that they need. So let's just try to let's normalize mental health. That's my goal, is to just normalize it, where we don't look at it as any different than heart, lung, and kidney problems. Or people will go see our children in a psychiatric hospital just like they do go to Levine Children's Hospital. Our children need our help too. When I worked at Strategic Behavioral Center, children used to ask me, Miss Fonda, why come the Panthers or the Hornets don't come and see us? Because it's that stigma. But see, it's invisible because we don't look sick. You know, I was working out at the gym one day and I had this gentleman tell me, well, one of the reasons why people don't have empathy and compassion for y'all is because you don't look sick. And I had to, of course, let him know. But at the end of the day, our children, and we need that same empathy, that same compassion as people who have cancer and things, because you hear all the time, especially around October with breast cancer, they're warriors, they're fighters. So are we. So are we. We're warriors and fighters. We have to fight every day some days to get up out of that bed. We have to fight every day to brush our teeth, put our clothes on, to go to work. We're warriors and we're champions too. And people need to realize that too.
Mm-hmm. I so agree with all of that. A lot of good comments in the chat box. Great question. Of course, our questions are coming from our virtual studio audience members, so keep them coming. Comments that this has been an awesome presentation, and thank you, Fonda. So
you're quite welcome. Thank y'all for getting on. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. This question kind of touches my heart. Do you think people would be suicidal if they feel loved?
That could be part of it, but to be quite honest, the stats say 90% of people who die by suicide are dealing with a treatable mental health condition. So again, let's get back to stigma. Quit using the words calling us crazy, weak, psycho, nut job, violent. Because you think about it, every time there's a mass killing, what runs under the bottom of the screen? Mental health. Mental health. We're dealing with mental health issues. We got to stop that. So again, it could be some of that, but for the most part, for me, I was diagnosed with depression and chemical imbalance. So depression is the #1 disorder that can take you down that slippery slope of suicide. So no, for the most part, yeah, I mean, it could be a factor, it could be a contributing factor, but for the most part, it's truly it's a mental health thing. If we got the help, if we have the support, if people would quit using the stigma, we wouldn't go down that path. And I would urge anyone who has not taken the QPR training, you can reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to give you my information. Gary can type in my email address, and y'all are welcome to take the training because I'm training for the month of July to honor National Minority Mental Health Month. I'm training for free every Wednesday from 1 o'clock to 2:30, and every Saturday from 1:30 to 3 o'clock. If you take the complete training, you get a certificate that lasts for 3 years, but the training lasts a lifetime. You also get a QPR booklet in PDF form, which you can print out the little book, the first part of the booklet, and print off your resources. I tell everybody when I finish training, write down your resources so you will have them available. And then the other part of the PDF I send you is 37 pages of what we went over in class, except in a longer way. And it also has situations that you can go through. It's really great training. And I urge everyone, what is an hour and a half out of your day if that hour and a half is spent learning how to save someone's life?
That is a great opportunity. It reminds me of that song, Had I Known How to Save a Life. I adore that song. And circling back to the question, it is an interesting thought about would people be suicidal if they feel loved. That brings to mind for me the isolation that comes with mental illness, and it feeds on itself. I'm not feeling well. I don't want to be around people. I have a hard time trusting. I don't like myself, so I'm not going to like you. And then it gets worse, and then I'm less likely to want to go out, and then it can be a vicious cycle. So
it's like a tempest in a teapot almost. But that isolation is probably one of the worst things that you can be, because like I told you, those thoughts get louder, and those thoughts go from thoughts to action. So that's why I'm saying that isolation. And with what's going on in society right now with us being isolated, I tell everybody during the training, check on people, make sure that they're okay. Call somebody and say, hey, how are you doing today? What's going on with you? Doing things like that means a lot. Send somebody a card. I love sending cards to people for no reason. And I make sure I send the card that I just don't go in and pick out anyone and say, oh, okay, I'm going to send this one. I really put thought into sending somebody a card. And you would be surprised, just sending somebody a card, how that makes somebody feel that you're thinking about them and you took the time to get them a card. So do things like that. You don't have to have money to bring joy to somebody's life. You do not have to have money whatsoever. And something else I say in that training before I end, treat people with empathy, compassion, and kindness, because you never know what somebody is going through. Somebody can be smiling in your face and all the while they're like, man, I'm going in my own life, or I'm struggling, I'm this. Treat people how you would like to be treated, because it goes a long way, especially with people who are struggling.
All right, next question. Mental health clinicians are responding to calls with the Chapel Hill Police. So in other words, they're going out in partnership. What are some of the benefits of that change?
Oh man, I was really excited here in Charlotte. Our crisis mobile team just came into play in April of last year. So we've had our crisis mobile team riding with the CIT officers for a year. And to me, the great thing about it is it builds trust and consistency. Because the thing is, when you're struggling with a mental health condition, as I said before, even suicidal, that trust is invaluable, and also being consistent. So it's invaluable because, number one, with what's going on in this country right now, not everybody's feeling the police, especially people of color. But at the same time, if you're bringing in that therapist, you're bringing in that clinician, that puts people at ease. So I think it's a great thing, and I'm hoping as time goes on, we have more crisis mobile units. Every city should have at least 2. 2 to 3. We have 1 in Charlotte, and as big as Charlotte is, we should have way more. Raleigh should have them. And the crown and jewel of the crisis mobile unit with CIT officers is Houston, Texas. Houston, Texas has the most CIT officers in the country, and they also have 12 mobile units with CIT officers and therapists riding together. I think it's a great thing. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I'm hoping that with what's going on in this country and with mental health getting worse and worse, that we will have more clinicians out there riding with police, because it is a wonderful thing to have, because they can do a diagnosis right there. They can talk to your family, and they can provide comfort as well. So I think it's a great thing, and I hope that more and more cities will catch on to that, because it really is a lifesaver, and it can help us a lot.
This next question is from Amy Robertson, our board member. She's a program leader in Basics. That is NAMI's class for parents and caretakers of children who show symptoms of mental health challenges before the age of 13. How can we reach the parents and caregivers of Black youth?
Through education. Again, I think it's through education and meeting them where they are. Meeting them where they are. And again, like Gary and I talked about, going to North Carolina Central to talk to them. I said, Gary, we have to go and we have to listen. So the first thing is you listen and let them tell us what's going on and what they need. But I think one of the biggest ways is, like I said, just going and listening to people and getting them educated, because education is the true key to racism. It's the key to mental health, and it's the key to suicide. And honest, a lot of these children now are asking those questions. They're asking the questions, but the parents aren't equipped to answer it. So again, education is the key. And another thing is, I'm hoping, like, Virginia and New York were the first two states. They were the first two states to implement mental health education in the schools. We need to see about getting that done in North Carolina and every other state in the country, starting them off at an early age, educating kids in school, like I said, teaching the little kids that the brain is the computer of our body, but also having events where we can educate parents. Like I had a young lady at West Mac High School, African American, that told me, she said, Miss Fonda, I'm dealing with depression. So we went through the signs, how long she'd had it, and she told me she had been dealing with it for months. And I asked her, I said, have you talked to somebody about what's going on with you? And she said, yes, ma'am, my mom. And I said, what did your mom say? She said, my mom said that I'm not living right. So again, we gotta find ways to educate the parents. And I think that's where NAMI steps in, and other organizations, by having more events and inviting the public. But don't sit up and tell them what we can do for them and things like that. We need to just listen and let them tell us how we can help them. We also need to let parents know about resources, because I get that a lot. I don't know where to go for the resources. We need to let them know. And we just, again, need to really educate parents on what mental health is, because by the time they start getting 18, 19, 20 years old, that's when a lot of the problems really start. And they have not, they're like, oh, that's just boys being boys. There's nothing wrong with them. They don't have a clue that they're dealing with mental health issues. So again, I think we need to start as an organization, getting more out there in these communities and let them telling us what they need from us, and being able to educate them on mental health, so we can start, as NAMI said and we have said, get on the front end and help these youth, so we won't have to be dealing with the issues on the back end.
Mm-hmm. Yes, especially if the youth has experienced psychosis, which is where the person loses some contact with reality to some extent, because the longer the brain stays in psychosis, the more brain damage is possible and likely. So that early intervention is so important. And just practically, if I'm a young person who has mental illness and I'm not getting help, or I'm not getting appropriate help, either culturally insensitive or I'm being met with stigma and judgment, that kind of closes the door slowly over time to my willingness to get any help. So that early intervention is so important. It is a main pillar of the strategic plans for the National Alliance on Mental Illness, both nationally and at the state level. As you know, Fonda, being our board member, and our other board members are here on the webinar tonight. So that is just so important, and I'm really glad that that's coming to the fore. I'm glad that that's something we're all embracing. And with Thursdays with NAMI, we'll continue to look at that. We'll continue to look at how we can reach more communities effectively And if you have thoughts about that, please type them in the chat box. We do save the chat box from each presentation, or you can email us at programs@naminc.org. Again, that's programs@naminc.org. I'm not seeing any additional questions. We probably have time for one, maybe two more. So if you're thinking of a question, but you've been holding back, now is the time to step forward. So I'll take
One of the things go ahead, Peg.
Gary and Eddie again are behind the scenes tech volunteers. Did you want to share a thought, Fonda?
No, I just, again, like I said, one of the biggest things is that people just really need to realize that mental health is not one size fits all. You know, that has been something I have been saying, that it's just not one size fits all. We have to take into culture. And even with the QPR Institute, I had to bring that to their attention, because when I went through my first training online with the slides, I'm like, something is missing from this. And I realized that they did not interject culture. And so the ACC had a training with a young lady from Active Minds. And when they did the training, I sat in and I listened, and she did not one time bring in culture. So I reached out to the QPR Institute, and I said, hey, she's doing people of color a disservice, because she did not one time bring up culture, which plays a big role into mental health. And I said, so we need to interject that in the QPR training, because if you have white trainers who are uncomfortable talking about race, they're not going to bring that up. And again, you're doing us a disservice. So that's something that I'm working with the QPR Institute. We're getting ready to interject culture into training, because you can't just sit up and cookie cutter and say, hey, everybody's training is this, everybody's mental health is the same. It is not. And unfortunately, due to years and years of negativity with mental health, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, people of color, we're behind the 8 ball. We're behind the 8 ball.
We had Victor Armstrong from the Department of Health and Human Services on this show maybe a month ago, and he said something really similar, that fewer African American and people of color become mental health professionals, so there are fewer to pick from. And he brought up a really salient example. If I'm an African American man and I want to talk about how someone followed me through the grocery store, a security guard maybe, or how I'm afraid to walk down the street, A, I might not be comfortable sharing that with a young blue-eyed clinician, and B, that person might not understand. They might hear paranoia, where that's a very real experience that person is going through. So yeah, there's a lot of value there, and you're right. There's just so much that we need to do. And yeah.
You know, I deal with a lot of student athletes, you know, from Wake Forest to, you know, student athletes all over the country. And with the African American players, they've come up to me and told me, Miss Fonda, I'm struggling, but there's no way I'm going to talk to my coach, number one. And number two, I'm not going to talk to a white clinician. They will refuse it, because they said they do not understand our culture. And when Gary and I met with Dan brought up some really startling statistics, because number one, we already got a shortage of psychiatrists anyway. But Dan said out of all the psychiatrists, I think in the country, only 3% are African American. He said out of all of the therapists, and I think this is what he said, only 14% are African American. And you're finding more and more now, especially with Black men, that they want to talk to someone who looks like them. And that's something that we're having to deal with. They're wanting more and more people that look like them, and you really can't blame them. For me, I've always said, get the person that you're comfortable with, because all my therapists have been white men. And I just started with a Black male, and I really like him. But I always just tell people, find who you're comfortable with. But for some people, people of color, with African American males and what's going on in this country, or it could be their first time ever going to see a therapist, they probably want someone who looks like them, that they feel like, hey, he can relate to me when I'm sitting up crying about what happened to George Floyd, or what's going on in this country, or I got stopped and my anxiety went through the roof. So these are things that, like I said, we have to work on as an organization too.
Mm. And for people who are newer to NAMI, you're referring to Dan Gilliston, the new CEO of the national office. He's an African-American man who's very dynamic and is really establishing a great presence so far. Yeah, and I think what's really important about what you said is it's not like you're getting your car fixed. It's not like brain surgery where it's a technical skill that you're looking for. This is a relationship. It's all about communication and trust. And that's what recovery is built on. So we are at the end of our 90 minutes. It has flown by.
Yeah, it's been awesome, though. I've really enjoyed it.
I have too. Thank you so very much, Fonda, for all that you do and for being with us tonight and giving us 90 minutes and sharing so much with our, with NAMI in general and with our virtual studio audience. And again, thanks to everyone for showing up tonight and being here with us. I want to thank you, and I want to encourage you. Oh, before I forget, we've got Latanya Du Bois sharing her story of recovery. She's an African-American, started as a young single mom, now an LGBTQ business owner. She has 7 kids of her own and a wonderful success story to share about behavioral health and her journey. On the 30th, 2 weeks from tonight, we've got Pooja Mehta talking about mental health in the South Asian community. So I'm real excited about these guests and all the things that we're going to be bringing to you in the future. Until then, be safe, go where you need to go, do what you need to do, and take care of yourself, take care of the people you love. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, and everybody, please take care of your mental health.
That's right. Can't say that enough. All right. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you again for having me. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.